Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News produced by Anson Evaluate. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK. Today I'm joined by my colleagues Peter Wright, Dr. Heather Anson and Sharona Barno. If you are a regular listener, you'll notice that we won't be doing our regular weekly update this week. So in this week's episode, we're going to be focusing on all things crypto. I'll pass over to my colleagues to introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Amelia. So my name is Peter. I'm the managing director and a solicitor at Digital Law, and it's great to actually be able to talk about a slightly different aspect of some of the work that we do when it comes to some of the sort of highly innovative and indeed increasingly highly regulated sectors like financial services and cryptocurrency here. So looking forward to sharing some of that insight with our audience today. So I will pass on to our expert on a lot of these issues, Dr. Heather Anson.
Hi, I'm Heather, and I am the managing director of Anson Evaluate, the one that produces this podcast. Don't blame me; it's all their fault. Anyway, I'm here because I talk about cryptocurrency, blockchain, all that stuff all the time. My job is to demystify it, I suppose. So hopefully, I can do a bit of that today.
Thank you. And I'm Sharona. Sorry about that. I'm Sharona, and I am the resident paralegal at Digital Law and a cybersecurity enthusiast.
Thanks, Sharona. It's great to get you all on here to kind of mix up our weekly news stories. So I will pass over to Heather to just kind of give you guys a brief understanding of all things crypto and NFT.
Okay, so this is my quick tour of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and NFTs for dummies. Okay, basically we start with blockchain because it's what makes cryptocurrency and NFTs possible. Blockchain, the simplest way to explain it is a technology that is both a transactional and bank in one sort of thing. It holds currencies or NFTs or whatever things. It holds intangible assets and allows the transfer of them, but it does it in such in a unique way that makes cryptocurrency and NFTs possible. And why that is because it allows for non-duplication of an intangible asset. Okay, that sounds confusing, but essentially, let's look at cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is an online digital coin. It's not like a digital record of a real life monetary note, such as it's not a £1 coin, but shown as a digital piece, like on your bank statement. It actually only exists online. The problem with that before blockchain was, how do you keep somebody from essentially creating extra copies out of it or spending it more than once, or sort of like counterfeiting? Because it would be really easy to counterfeit something like a digital coin unless you have something like blockchain, which is in its essence something that makes you only able to create and spend a coin once. That's where cryptocurrency comes in, or cryptocurrency in the way it is. Since blockchain has existed, that gave rise to Bitcoin and then all the slew of other cryptocurrencies that come from there. Now, the new iteration that we see is something called NFTs, which is another great acronym for non-fungible tokens. That makes sense, right? Non-fungible tokens. What does that mean? Essentially, it is, again, an electronic asset, generally some form of artwork, such as a digital graphic piece of art. We've also seen it in sports teams in the US, like part of the NBA. They put signed images of their players on, and if you want to be the only one who has this, it's like limited edition artwork. So that can happen because of blockchain. Again, allows you to have a digital asset that can't be copied or duplicated or counterfeited in the same way that it would be if you didn't have a blockchain that could ensure that. So that hopefully is a 101 for dummies version of what all these things are.
Thanks, Heather. So now you guys have got kind of a brief understanding about all things crypto, we will move into our first story of today. So our first story is in the US. So the US Department of Justice have confiscated around $5 billion worth of Bitcoin. So officials have also arrested and charged 2 people on Tuesday with attempting to launder the money, which amounts to nearly 120,000 Bitcoin. These funds were stolen by the hackers who breached a cryptocurrency exchange in 2016. At the time, it was valued at around $71 million, but with the rise in Bitcoin's value, it's now valued at around 5 billion. I'll pass over to Heather to unpick this.
Okay, right. So a couple of different layers here. One we have the exchange, which is one step outside the blockchain. You have an exchange is a bit like a stock market where you can exchange different, in the stock market, you exchange different types of stocks. On a cryptocurrency exchange, you exchange different types of coins. Now, it's not to say that crypto coins, blockchains themselves are immune from being hacked. There have been at least 1 or 2 instances of a blockchain being hacked and coins stolen that way, but that's very, very rare. However, an exchange is different because that is where the crypto, all different types of cryptocurrency are being kept in, well, they call them wallets, which is sort of coming up with a term in crypto, in the digital age that reminds you of something in the real world. So a wallet where you can have all your different types of coins and you can exchange them with other people. So somebody broke into one of these exchanges and either stole a lot from some people or a little bit from a lot of people, which is often what happens with these schemes. They were able to steal a lot from some people, and then you do something that a lot of criminals again do when they're in the real world, which is they laundered that money through different exchanges, through different currencies. It's why we have money laundering regulations here in the UK and elsewhere. It's to keep us as a profession from being used as something that money passes through in order to clean it up, to make it, to the further away you get from the stolen money, the harder it is to trace it back, and that's what laundering it is. So that's what they essentially did. They stole the money from this exchange, from people's wallets in this exchange, and then they passed it through different exchanges into different currencies, and somehow somebody actually was paying attention at a government enforcement level and found this and was able to confiscate it. And by the time they did, it was up to the amount of 50 billion, which is not the amount they stole, but the amount of what it was worth when they finally got caught. Any questions?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it illustrates how difficult and complex this investigation must have been. I mean, the article refers to there being investigators in Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, and in Ansbach in Germany on taking part in a very lengthy investigation, looking at over 2,000 different transactions. So piecing all of this together certainly will not have been the work of a moment. And I think it actually illustrates as well how difficult it is to stay on top of these economic crime issues around money laundering. I mean, as lawyers, we have to now carry out a plethora of regulatory checks on every single client we take on, just because we have to satisfy the requirements of the money laundering regulations here in the UK. Because there's always the risk of a law firm being used as a source to get those clean funds. And yet, I mean, I sat in a conference a while back that was looking at general AML risks to law firm. That lasted over an hour just looking at that on its own, and they didn't go anywhere near cryptocurrency. So it just kind of shows that there's still, I think, a mindset amongst regulated professionals not necessarily to look at these sorts of risks.
Yeah, and in the real world, in the real world of money, we have something called forensic accounting, which I've done a little bit of that, but it's a real specialism to be able to take a look at transactions over a long period of time and suss them out. So on this level, what you're having to do is forensic accounting and adding in computerized specialism. So it's digital forensic accounting, which is another skill level altogether. And I hope there's somebody getting paid a heck of a lot of money to be able to do that, because it is It's a very difficult job when you're just looking at real currencies and bank statements and transactions, but to do that on a crypto level is yet again, it's like a superpower.
I suppose it's an additional cost as well then that regulators have to have when it comes to actually making sure they've got the skill levels and the investigators available either on their staff or to spend money having them retained so that you can actually undertake an investigation of this size. I mean, economic crime like money laundering is a difficult, complex, expensive thing to investigate anyway, before you then start going into these sort of labyrinthine transactions online, where the number of people who are skilled forensic investigators along those lines who can do the work is you're probably fishing from a fairly limited pool of people that can really get into that in the sort of depth and then be able to put together the evidential report that you need at the end of an investigation. Because it is such a highly specialized area. Interesting though, that as always the way of financial crime though, at the very end of this, it says that the people that have been arrested are up before a federal judge on counts of conspiracy to defraud the US, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. If found guilty, they could serve up to 25 years in prison. So as is always the way with financial crime like this, if they catch you, they will nail you to the wall, and you'll actually end up serving far longer for something like this than if you just 20 years ago, the old model of walking into a bank with a sawn-off shotgun. Why spend years in prison potentially for that when you can potentially take billions here, and usually they won't even be able to catch you or catch up with the crime, and will not even realise the crime's been committed until you're then long gone and your electronic footprints have disappeared. But at least, yes, the penalty is there. Will it actually end up being a sufficient deterrent? Probably not, when you can potentially walk away with the millions that were at issue here. Well, sorry, billions, I should say. £3.7 billion, $5 billion.
That very nicely leads us into our next story. So this is coming from Chain Analysis. They're reporting that criminals have laundered £6.4 billion worth of cryptocurrency in 2021, which is up by 30% from the previous year. So this kind of mirrors exactly what we've just been saying, that actually when police do strike, they can actually cause a huge blow. However, with 30% rise in cryptocurrency crime, it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Well, yeah, and again, we look in real life and we see the same types of things. When you start investigating financial crimes, or indeed many other types of crimes, there are limited numbers of places you can go to fence stolen goods or to launder money. It's not like say going into any grocery store. It's a much smaller marketplace. So in that sense, the fact that they've been able to narrow down where a lot of these transactions are happening, the exchanges where a lot of the money laundering is happening, is a good thing. It's an advance. It means they're closer to being able to investigate these in the same way that they have other types of financial crimes. So it's a good advancement. It probably still needs a lot more help, but that is a good sign in terms of being able to crack down.
Precisely, and when we're looking at crimes that have been committed, we kind of link that very nicely into the current situation in Ukraine. So according to Elliptic, they have been analysing the crypto asset donation that has been going into the country, and this has increased by over 900% in 2021. And this Bitcoin has kind of emerged as an alternative funding method, which has been allowing international donors to bypass financial institutions which are blocking payments to activist groups. So there have been a few specific activist groups involved here. So one of which is called Come Back Alive, and another Ukraine Cyber Alliance. And Ukraine Cyber Alliance actually specifically only accepts cryptocurrency as kind of payment and donation. And close to $100,000 have been received in the past year through Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ether, and stablecoins.
Thanks, Amelia. I mean, I thought this was a fascinating story. We know that there have been sort of cyber wars taking place between Russia and the Ukraine going back to 2017 and the NotPetya attack, which originated in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine, which they think came from Russian state-sponsored hackers that ended up taking down some systems for large multinationals around the world, because it was a very aggressive type of ransomware that simply takes advantage of certain weaknesses in different systems. As a result, yeah, many systems were taken down around the world, inadvertently sort of caught in the crossfire. This has become an even bigger issue as the tensions have escalated in recent months. I think the other interesting takeaway from this as well is that, I mean, as mentioned there in that story too, the use of cryptocurrency to then buy arms, military equipment, training services, and medical supplies. We know that a number of nations are currently selling arms to Ukraine so that they can have a higher level of armament in face of the current threat that they face. While, of course, any nation state that is specifically providing arms is going to be wanting payment in hard currency rather than cryptocurrency, it does raise the question, though, of have funds changed hands in cryptocurrency that have then been put through systems to then allow a sort of payment in hard currency for those services that are being provided. Indeed, the UK is one of the larger providers of arms and military hardware to Ukraine. But in the meantime, it's I think because of the high amount of ransomware coming out of this, and the big takeaway for any of our listeners today is going to be, if you do have any vulnerabilities on your systems, if you do have systems saying please install a patch or please install an update, do not delay in installing that update, because such is the level of aggression that's currently taking place in Ukraine there. You might find that there are aggressive forms of malware and ransomware out there that could wreak havoc with your system. So don't let any vulnerabilities go uncured at this time.
One thing I found quite fascinating about this story is how it mentioned North Korea has actually also been allegedly stealing $400 million worth of cryptocurrency as well. I found that quite interesting because it's another example of how cryptocurrency is being used in the political space for different things. In that case, though, they're using it to fund their missile development. And it's going to be interesting to see the reaction from these major international institutions, like, for example, the United Nations, NATO, and the such, and what their approach to cryptocurrency as a potential security threat, or maybe the way it's being used to fund organizations which are seen to be security threats. So I don't know, what is your opinion on that, Heather? Do you think cryptocurrency could be something that's tamped down on by these major institutions?
I think the uses and abuses of cryptocurrency are about as wide as the imagination can conceive. And being able to crack down on it is quite difficult. It's almost easier probably to go after individuals, such as we heard in the first story, than it is to go after a nation state that's doing it. Because if you've got a nation state that's doing it, if you've got an individual that's doing it, you can find them, arrest them, put them in jail, but you can't really, find the nation state that's doing this, arrest it, and put it in jail. If we could do that with North Korea, we would have done that a while ago. And it becomes more complicated. So in a sense, if this is being used more and more by nation states to get money to get around sanctions, your traditional sanctions, we're going to have to come up with a much better way of sanctioning and blocking them off.
I think that's a really, really good point, when we think that at the moment the more traditional sort of sanctions that are being talked about towards Russia if they invade Ukraine, there's been talk of locking them out of the SWIFT banking system, which is the basis upon which the majority of conventional financial transactions and sales are undertaken online using online banking. There is the risk that, of course, okay, you take them out of that, but that things like transactions here using cryptocurrency would continue entirely unaffected. So there's almost the risk that, yeah, okay, you could cut off Russia from the global banking system, but you'd then actually probably be forcing them into then using other systems of cryptocurrency. So I think there is actually the need there for when they're talking about sanctions to actually sort of be properly going into the realms of transactions using cryptocurrency and indeed other assets, because otherwise it's a bit like whack-a-mole. You end up here cutting off one avenue and another one will just rapidly open up, and there won't really be much in the way of a hardship felt by the imposition of the sanction in the first place.
So moving on to kind of a facet of crypto that we haven't yet explored is the fact new laws are looking to be passed to deal with the misleading crypto asset promotion the Treasury has announced. So although 2.3 million people in the UK own a crypto asset, the government is worried that some consumers may not understand what they are actually buying, because, you know, as you heard Heather explain at the beginning, that there is not kind of a black and white answer to what exactly is cryptocurrency, how do you use it, etc. And so, and when you're looking at cryptocurrency, Bitcoin are largely unregulated, and investors kind of lack many protections that typical banking does actually provide you with. So I'll pass on to Heather to kind of talk through the sort of rules and regulations that are being thrown around, but it's still kind of not there yet.
Yeah, well, and yes and no. I think part of this is sometimes thinking we need to reinvent the wheel. And I say this a lot when it comes to legislating for a digital age. In fact, there's a presentation I do a lot around this and I say there's 3 stages: things where we can actually do it with the laws that already exist. The other is slightly tweaking the rules that exist, and then others just say, okay, let's template something that we already do and create something new, but with a foundation. And this, for most of this, I see this in the first category. I mean, misrepresentation in the sales of what you do is that's already illegal. We don't have to say that it's also illegal for cryptocurrency, because if it's illegal for everything, it's also illegal for cryptocurrency. I think because our legislators don't understand cryptocurrency, they somehow think we need added protection when it comes to misleading sales. But it's sort of like, let's see, what about fidget spinners? I mean, nobody understands what the heck a fidget spinner is, but you know, you sell it saying, well, it's a useless piece of thing that you just hours of entertainment just doing this, and people buy it. Well, you don't understand a fidget spinner, but you didn't need extra laws to explain to people that a fidget spinner is useless, and if they want to spend their money on it anyway, spend their money on it. So same thing with cryptocurrency. If you don't understand what you're buying, then and it is something complicated, then you have an obligation, some obligation to either learn what it is, or as the seller to inform people of what it is. But there has to be a balance. There's a bit of the buyer beware versus the obligation not to mislead or intentionally mislead people. If we think it's so much easier to do, and this involved some celebrities, including Kim Kardashian, who just seems to be involved in all these things. But I take the example of the Fire Festival. I mean, that celebrities saying this is going to be this great thing, and that being such a huge scam. And that wasn't some out there, oh my gosh, it's cryptocurrency, and how do we not? I don't understand it, and that's how I got taken advantage of. No, it's just the natural use of celebrities to show what it means. I mean, I saw a documentary, I think it was last week or week before, about WeWork, where Ashton Kutcher was on there saying, oh, this is really great. So using celebrities to push something that then turns out to be just a giant scam, not even just scam. Sometimes they are intentionally wanting to put something together, but they don't understand how to make it actually happen. I think Fire Festival wasn't intentionally a scam. It just ended up being a scam because they didn't have the understanding and the backing to do it. And that is what's happening, I think, with some of the cryptocurrency things that are going out there. So I would tell people, if they're thinking about buying cryptocurrency, if you don't understand it, understand it's the same as buying a stock in a company that you don't know anything about or what they do. You're taking a real big chance that you might lose everything. And it's not on the stock exchange, so there's no federal regulator making sure it's a private stock if the private stock buy. So there's nobody really helping you out there. So really, really buyer beware.
Exactly, and that kind of takes us on to our next story. You mentioned Kim Kardashian. So there are class action claims that Ethereum Max has operated a pump and dump scheme where misleading marketing is used to inflate the price of an asset, then sold to unwitting investors as a profit. So I think it was Kim Kardashian, Floyd Mayweather, and basketball player Paul Pierce that have kind of had allegations thrown at them by misleadingly promote and sell the cryptocurrency. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think the fascinating thing here is it's almost an extension, yes, of that last point that Heather was making, but where you get celebrities involved, like Kim Kardashian. I mean, there's also been stories with regards to, is it Dogecoin, which ended up being promoted by Elon Musk. You know, he would just tweet about it and then its price would exponentially increase when he starts saying, oh, maybe we'll start accepting payment for Teslas using this. And indeed, then he's sort of done the same thing with accepting payment in Bitcoin. And these are the sorts of things that are leading to these sort of artificial pressures on a market that is not regulated in the normal way. Bearing in mind that normally, you know, with a conventional currency, you have things like inflation and then certain levers that a government can pull to restrain things like inflation. It can end up playing with the interest rates, it can play with the monetary supply, it can do quantitative easing. There's different things that central banks can do. Yet there isn't anything like that when it comes to a cryptocurrency. So therefore, you can end up having these sort of this misleading promotion can have such a massive impact on the market. Sometimes the celebrities could be quite unwitting in this as well, and it's just meaning then that you could end up having asset prices way over where they should be. And it's almost reminiscent of some of the sort of asset price bubbles that we've had in the past. Everything from the, if you think of the dot-com boom 20 years ago, where everyone suddenly thought, oh, the future is technology, and millions was invested in websites. And of course, the technology simply wasn't there then to deliver e-commerce in the way that it can be done now. So that was sort of an ahead of the time, and there was a lot of people lost a lot of money in that. It was a modern day South Sea bubble. So this sort of thing has happened before, but we're seeing such massive asset price increases in a lot of these investments. And I think some of the stories we've covered today have shown how that can happen, where an asset price has gone from millions to billions in a very short space of time. I think this is where the challenge then comes in terms of if and how these sorts of assets are going to be regulated. So that story talks about a complaint that's been filed in the Central District Court of California, but really, what is the state of California going to be practically able to do in real terms? That's going to be the question.
Following on from that, something I've actually noticed a lot online is the use of NFTs by celebrities and celebrities popularizing them. So recently there was an interview on Jimmy Kimmel. Paris Hilton went on there and she was advertising NFTs, and it was one of those ape ones. And you could see it's so awkward. Both of them were saying, oh yeah, I've got an NFT too, check out mine. This one is, you know, it's meaningful to me because of something, something, something. And you can see it's all a selling point. They've been told to say this, or at least it seems that they've been told to say this. And I find that quite fascinating because when you talked about the bubble bursting, a lot of people have been saying that there is an NFT bubble and it eventually will burst because everybody's buying into these now. Everybody's minting, everybody's purchasing these NFTs, and as more people enter the market, flood the market, the value of these things are going to go down. So what's your view on that, Heather? Do you think there is an NFT bubble, and do you think it's going to burst?
Well, in the traditional sense, no, because there are not a lot of massive companies being built just on the NFT. What's going to probably burst is the bubble of people's imagination of what they've bought. Like the person who won the auction to buy one of the first auctioned NFTs and spent millions on this piece of art, this NFT art, and will that person ever get that value back even just by looking at the art. Some people are like, oh, it's in looking at the art. Well, it's a piece of digital art, so it's not like you hang it on your wall, although he could reproduce it and hang it on his wall because he has that, but then it's just a poster. So the value of what an NFT really is, because it's not like a currency where it can be purchased and changed. The value I see in NFTs really is to give the same kind of protection for visual artists that you have for, let's say, people who write music. Because right now, or take photographs. Right now, if you have Getty owns your photos, then anytime the photo is used, you're getting some money for it. If you've written a song, anytime the song is played or reproduced, you're getting money for it. If you create a piece of digital art, the only way to get money past the first sale of it is by doing it with NFTs. And so I'm hoping that at some point the commercialized version of this, where everyone thinks they're going to go up in value, changes, and then it becomes just valuable for the producers of digital art, so that they will actually be able to continue benefiting off their work beyond the first sale, like you would be able to do with music and photographs and other things like that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me is how, because there is no formal regulatory body when it comes to NFTs, you could basically steal somebody's art, mint that, and then sell it off. So how much protection is there really for the original creators?
Well, that, again, instead of recreating the rule, we do have copyright. And so anytime you publish, and if you've put artwork, digital artwork out there, if you publish it in any way, if someone steals that, it's still covered by copyright. So it's just a matter of getting our heads around the fact that just because it's being sold in a different way and in a different manner, doesn't mean it still doesn't have the same protections it had before it became an NFT. It was still a bit of digital art, still a bit of it was still a copyright protected asset, if that makes sense.
I think that's a really good point, but it's also highlighting that I think it is so ripe out there, the market for a massive fraud to be perpetuated using NFT technology. And Heather, you and I were at a conference last year, and we got talking to Jamie Bartlett, who produced the Misleading Crypto Queen podcast for the BBC, and we were sort of thinking, well, what are the risks going to be in future? And we were sort of collectively thinking that, yeah, the next big fraud is likely to be in that market. We've seen the OneCoin fraud perpetuated there, and it just seems that in a market that is indeed not necessarily understood and is having these massive price inflations, then who knows what could happen. But suddenly people could find that they've paid tens of millions for assets that actually prove to be rather more intangible than may have at first appeared to be the case. And also, Heather, your analogy to WeWork earlier on, I thought was fantastic, because it really does illustrate this very well. There you had a company that was valued at $17.5 billion. Was it 17 or was it higher than that? It was still an incredible sum. But then when analysts started to sort of lift the veil and say, well, what actually is this organization worth? The actual book price of what was essentially an office space company was a fraction of 17.5 billion. It was just that people had got caught up in the hope, the aspiration, the promotion that the chief executive himself sort of put around it, which just sort of fed into this ever accelerating sort of ball of confidence, until suddenly someone realized, well, actually, that's all well and good. This sounds great. It sounds wonderful, but it's an office company. It's not going to change the world. And that office company is worth less than $2 billion, not $17 billion. It's a fact. And once people realized that, it was a bit like the emperor's new clothes. Will we end up with a similar thing with some of these NFT transactions? That will be the interesting thing with the market to find out this year.
Precisely, Peter. It'll be, like you say, keep kind of watching what happens, because like Sharon was mentioning before, this had been advertised on Jimmy Kimmel, and pretty much that is a household name. Everyone is recognizing that. So it'll be interesting to see where the market takes us. So moving on to our next story. This is moving away from the points you've already mentioned and focusing more on kind of the environment. The environmental impact that cryptocurrency has is incredible. So last year, Kazakhstan became the second biggest cryptocurrency mining country in the world. And this is thanks partly to the vast mine, which contains 50,000 computers in the deserts. So young men are working here for 12 hours a day for 15 days in a row without even leaving the site, just in order to keep these computers running around the clock. But because of the rapid growth of the mining in the country, it has put huge pressures on the energy sector, which relies kind of heavily on polluting the carbon-intense coal-fired power stations, which, as we all know, we're looking to cut carbon, and with cryptocurrency, we're producing a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, well, I noticed you didn't try and pronounce the name of the place in the desert. Ekabastus, by the way, Ekabastus. I had to look it up. It's in the middle of nowhere. And the number one country for mining is China. I believe they still hold the record for that. And this is something that I find fascinating, is that we think of this as such a futuristic thing, cryptocurrency and crypto mining, when it's actually burning more fossil fuels than almost any other industry, actually than any other industry in the world. The Bitcoin alone is burning so much fuel because we have to have computers running all over the world to do these transactions. And as innovative as Bitcoin is and the blockchain is, it's also not very efficient. If you think about the number of transactions a normal bank can do, electronic transactions a bank can do, it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands a second. And that's why you never really have to wait too long when you make a bank transfer on your normal bank account. But something like Bitcoin, because of all of the steps and all of the actual computer power that goes into every transaction, you can only do about, I believe, 7 to 10 transactions a second. Now it may still seem like a lot, but 7 to 10 transactions a second versus tens of thousands per second means it's a very intensive and inefficient process, which means you've got so much power being used for it. Heck, that makes no difference if you're driving around in an electric car if you're buying and selling cryptocurrency at this point.
Thanks, Heather. And I just can't get over with this story the fact that it's illustrating that, we had the COP26 climate conference this year where, countries were falling over themselves to announce measures to reduce carbon consumption. And yes, we're going to get rid of all these carbon, the internal combustion engines propelled motor vehicles, and we're going to get rid of all of the coal-fired power stations. We're going to rip out all of the old gas-fired central heating, and it's going to switch to heat pumps and various different technology. It's going to cost billions to do for many different countries, and yet in the meantime, through cryptocurrency and other things like everything from music and video streaming, which are increasingly growing technologies, these all massively increase the amount of power that's needed to run those grids. This is a very practical example of that. I think it's also another example, though, the fact that, like we say, that China's number one, but who would have thought Kazakhstan being the second biggest cryptocurrency mining country in the world? It just shows that you don't need to have a previous track record in terms of technology, skills, or infrastructure here. It really is the Wild West almost, and any country can suddenly find itself really innovating and leading the way here in terms of anything from cryptocurrency mining to some of these other technologies. Yeah, as I say, who'd have thought that Kazakhstan would be number two? I'd be fascinated to know the number three country as well.
And they'll start looking at pollution as well, so that helps,
Another interesting point kind of to mention about Kazakhstan there, as there have been bans on cryptocurrency that have been brought in China, there is actually a lot of Chinese people moving to conduct their cryptocurrency and their mining in Kazakhstan itself. I believe there was a clip on the BBC to do with Kazakhstan. They actually interview some of the workers that are working there, and I believe they had just received a delivery in this specific clip of 50,000 computers that have come directly over from China. So it is actually growing hugely in Kazakhstan. It'll be interesting to see, like you say, whether they continue to hugely pollute the entire world with this. So yeah. We mentioned before kind of how big sports groups are using cryptocurrency, and one thing we've not mentioned is the kind of gambling-like mentality that is surrounding these. So there are clubs like Southampton and Arsenal that have been partnering with online betting and crypto companies, and there is actually growing concern from regulators for the not promoting the risks involved, and it is creating this, like I said, gambling mentality. What are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Amelia. I found this a fascinating story because when it comes to sports sponsorship, it's always had a fairly checkered history because football clubs never used to have sponsors, and then suddenly they've become commercial juggernauts, as has been the case in other sports, where suddenly you've got people wanting to pay millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions to appear on the kit. So in the 1970s, cigarette companies used to love sponsoring sports events. We used to have the World's Professional Snooker Championship used to be sponsored by Embassy in Sheffield, and it was a huge tournament, actually far bigger than it is now, because you had a big brand like that behind it. You used to have tobacco companies sponsoring teams in Formula One. Then it was, of course, people realised, this isn't really a good thing to have, tobacco companies promoting themselves through sponsorships. That gradually got banned at both the UK and European level. Then we've had issues with, for example, alcohol being used to sponsor sporting events, and then of course someone really puts two and two together and thinks that for example, having motor racing sponsored by neat liquor isn't again necessarily the best piece of advertising in the world. So that's gradually fallen by the wayside. Then we've had the idea of cheap snack corporations, Walkers and everything, sponsoring cricket. The amount of sort of sugary snacks that were sponsoring the 100 that was introduced to the tournament in cricket last year was very, very high. Now people are thinking, maybe having all these sugary foods and fatty foods associated with sport isn't a good thing, so they'll regulate against that. Now in football, we have cryptocurrency and sports betting getting involved, and again, psychologists saying, that's not really a good idea, is it? So it's almost like whack-a-mole with regulators trying to work out what is or is not an acceptable commercial partner for these organizations to use. But indeed, when you have, particularly as well, I mean, football is such a massive sport beamed into people's front rooms. Whole families end up watching it. You're potentially exposing children at a very early age to these very powerful brands and practices. And that's why, consequently, the UK Financial Conduct Authority is looking and thinking, should we therefore start introducing rules around this? And it'll be a problem again for the football clubs who've been trying to pay for the really expensive rights to be able to pay the massive salaries to their players through signing these deals, and then they might suddenly find that those deals might have to come to an end somewhat sooner than they'd planned. But I'm sure they'll find someone else to replace them as another sponsor willing to go on the shirt.
It's almost like we need to introduce in the early stages of our education how to interpret ads and news and all of that. So sort of a form of critical thinking at a young age where we don't just take everything in, we actually question it, because we're all subject to it. I remember, and don't lie about this, Peter, at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was buying toilet paper and you said, are you sure we don't need to buy toilet paper? Yeah, we don't need to buy toilet paper, it's okay. But we are all, we can all be susceptible to it, and the fact is that we're a part of our education as legal professionals is critical thinking, is learning how to look at things and question every part of it, and even us occasionally get sucked in by that. And so maybe instead of looking at playing whack-a-mole with taking ads off, we should look at introducing this type of critical thinking earlier on. Of course, then the advertisers will find a way of getting around that at some point, like getting around the regulators with online betting by saying, when the fun stops, stop. Okay, that takes care of it. Everyone will be fine now who has a gambling addiction. So something like that. That would be my. It's starting off early instead of, trying to head off the problem once it's already well out of control.
I think you're quite right, but also, of course, when it comes to pandemic panic buying, yes, that is something that everyone seemed to engage in. I was indeed almost caught up in the panic there. But yeah, I think that illustrates it very well. And it's interesting how it is a number of clubs that are caught up in this, and indeed it's not just football either. And the herd will gradually probably look at this and then gradually move away, and a different type of commercial partner will be sought out. I'm sure that will be found to be equally unsavoury as well and end up being closed down. But this is just the constant challenge that the regulators face, of course.
Thanks, Peter. And moving on to our last story of today. So we mentioned BBC's Crypto Queen podcast earlier today. And this particular story is looking at the fact that BBC have pulled a documentary about a cryptocurrency entrepreneur from the television schedule quite last minute after The Guardian raised some questions about some of its kind of central claims. So the programme was claiming that this individual had turned $50 of investment at the start of 2021 into $8 million by the end of the year. So this is kind of suggesting that he had made an investment return of almost 16 million% in just 9 months. And so the Guardian asked the BBC if it was confident in its claims, and the BBC did kind of lack the fact that it didn't mention that the individual's cryptocurrency Orfano had been shut down in October, with many investors very unhappy at being kind of caught out of pocket. And all of the online articles also mentioning this had been removed. And I actually remember reading this specific article and I thought, this is unfortunately quite a common theme, and I didn't find it very interesting until the fact that we've got the BBC suddenly pulling an entire documentary on this guy. So I will pass on to you guys to talk through that one.
Again, critical thinking and early education would help with a lot of this. Or that wasn't very helpful, but true.
Absolutely right. And indeed, it would help in so many walks of life. I think that general promotion of critical thinking. But I think the interesting thing in this article was the fact that this is the second time the BBC has done a documentary on cryptocurrency that's then ended up being pulled before transmission. And it almost suggests that the researchers themselves have almost sort of been taken in by the story of immense wealth being generated in such a short space of time, and thinking, oh, we have a duty here to sort of, well, the BBC's Reithian values of educating the public. It's feeling, oh, we need to tell people how this is happening, and actually not necessarily then seeing the signs in the background that show that sometimes these success stories are not quite as clear cut as they may at first seem. Ultimately, as the national broadcaster, the BBC doesn't want to find that it's ended up putting out content that could in itself be misleading, or indeed in this instance, promoting what could have been, what looks to have been a potentially fraudulent scheme. And I'm sure this is, if it's saying it's been shut, that this currency has been shut down, it's probably in the process of being investigated as well. But certainly those investors who've lost money probably are not going to be getting a penny of it back. So this is illustrating really our whole episode today. We've talked about a lot of the inherent risks in these digital assets, and I think this illustrates it quite well. It also illustrates how complex and innovative this technology is, and how certainly mainstream journalists there are and researchers are struggling to be able to apply their own critical reasoning to it in their making of these programs. I think it's, in this instance, probably a rather good thing that it's been pulled before transmission.
Yep. And I think that something you said should be noted too, is it's not even just the people who are investing in these companies who are left out. I think there are a lot of people who enter into these companies to create them thinking, oh, this is the next big thing, and wanting to be entrepreneurs and wanting to do it, and then getting in over their head. And again, this is an old story. It's happened before, but with cryptocurrency, they think oh, I can do this. If I just do a little bit of research, I can understand it and I can create my own cryptocurrency and we can do this. And we're aware of companies that do this. They get in there and they may have all the best intentions, but then when it comes right down to it, they're not able to sustain the vision that they have, much like WeWorks, which was essentially glorified inspirational posters. It just doesn't have, they don't have the ability to make it what it wants to be. So some of these people aren't really out to scam you. They are really wanting to try and be innovative. Sorry, that word is, I'm struggling with that word today, innovative. And they fail at it miserably, and other people tend to pay for it.
Thanks, Heather. So that was our last story for today. Thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this webinar, and thank you to both Heather and Sharona for joining us this week. It's been great having you on here and having both your knowledge to add to our discussion. So myself and Peter will be back next week with our pretty standard weekly update, which focuses more on hacks and attacks than cryptocurrency, but I'm sure they will no doubt make an appearance. So just a reminder that these episodes are available on our website, our YouTube channel, and podcast channels such as Spotify and Apple Music. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next week.